Hey everyone, Ben here. You were expecting the intro music, weren't you? It's coming. So is my interview with the fascinating Grandmaster David Smerdon. But first, a couple things I wanted to mention. So I just finished a good book about marketing. It wasn't directly related to the podcast, but basically the gist of it that I took home was I need to be looking to increase listener engagement. Are you guys engaged? The book sort of suggested no matter how engaged you are, you could be more engaged. So here we are, engaging. So the first thing I did was I had gotten an email from a listener named Steven, whose full name I'm not going to use because I didn't ask his permission. But Steven mentioned that he really likes the book recommendations, but he listens to the podcast on the go. So it would be helpful for him if they were all listed somewhere. So you know what? I did it. I made a list on my webpage. Go to perpetualchesspod.com, and then you can find the link from there. Every guest that has been on the show who has suggested a book or written a book, I endeavor to list all of the books. I love you guys, but I didn't yet re-listen to the 40 hours of podcast in order to make this list. It's from memory, so I'm sure I'm missing a few. Email me and let me know if you can think of them. But anyway, ordering the books is a good thing to do, even if you're like Pontus Carlson and the books just pile up and pile up. That happens to me too. But it supports chess, it supports the authors. I'm going to get a small kickback if you were to happen to order it through the site. The fee is pretty nominal, but hey, I can buy my son a Snickers or something like that. Nothing wrong with that. So thanks for that. Other ideas are join the Facebook group. If you search Perpetual Chess within Facebook, you'll find it. I put a post up every episode, and sometimes people weigh in and discuss it, talk about the guests, stuff like that. A few of the guests have popped on, so you can check that out. You can also look for me on Twitter at Beneficial1. I'm on Twitter more than is healthy. I mostly tweet about chess and the podcast. I try not to tweet about Donald Trump or the ascendant Philadelphia 76ers or other topics of interest to me. I try not to tweet about them too much. So check that out as well. The chess world is small, so I want Perpetual Chess listeners to feel like a community. So any way you want to reach out, I'm always happy to hear from you all. So that's all I have to say for now. So sit back and enjoy the interview with the brilliant David Smerdon. Thanks. Hello, everyone. I'm Ben Johnson, and this is the Perpetual Chess Podcast. On Perpetual Chess, I have weekly conversations with the chess world's best players, promoters, and educators about their lives, careers, current projects, and best practices. For more information, go to perpetualchesspod.com. Hello, everyone. I'm here with Australian Grandmaster David Smerdon, number 2 in Australia, but joining us from Milan, Italy. David, thanks a lot for coming on Perpetual Chess.
No worries. Thanks for inviting me.
So I've been a fan of yours for a while, David. I mean, you know, I've heard of a lot of Grandmasters, so you were sort of on my radar vaguely, but then in the most recent Olympiad, you played Magnus Carlsen and gave a little interview with FM Mike Klein, and you gave sort of, you managed to draw him, which, you know, for any of us listening, basically would be an amazing accomplishment, and you gave a sort of everyman perspective, and from that point forward, I've been following your blog and your career, and I'm a fan of yours.
Wow, that's nice to hear. Not too many people say that because I'm not a professional chess player, but but I'm also a fan of yours, you know, Ben. I really think that the podcast is fantastic, and we were just saying off air before that in particular the personalities that you've got on here would be, if I was to run a podcast, that'd sort of be the selection of people I'd choose. So there you go. The fandom is mutual.
Oh, well, thanks. And also, I guess congratulations are in order because you're an academic, and I know it's a tough field trying to land a job, and you have succeeded. So could you tell our listeners a little about it? I'm a little bit more relaxed now than I was last month in May, because in 1 week I had my PhD defense, my marriage, and just before it, my bachelor party, all crammed into 6 days. So that was an epic week, and the upshot from it all, from the PhD perspective, is that I'm moving back to Australia. I've been in Europe for 5, going on 6 years now, but I got a job back in Brisbane, my hometown. So moving back there at the end of the year. Yeah, that's an amazing coup, I'm sure, to go back to your hometown after so much travel over the years.
Yeah, it was sort of almost a little bit by accident that I ended up getting the job there, because the the job market for academics in economics is kind of brutal. You have this worldwide job market. So I had that in Chicago in January when it was sort of absolutely freezing, running around doing interviews for jobs in countries sort of scattered around the world. Obviously, a little bit of personal preference for Australia, but also looking around Europe. And yeah, this is just the way the cards landed, I guess.
And you mentioned on your blog you were in Chicago as well?
Yeah. So the way that the job market works is pretty crazy because people who finish their PhD and also people who finished it a few years before, they all apply to about 1,000 publicly listed jobs from different institutions, universities, some of the big things like the UN and whatever. And if you get your interviews, then they all happen in the same city at the same time during this massive conference for economists and people in finance. So every year it's in January in the States somewhere, so it's always cold, and Chicago is freezing, and you sort of run between hotel to hotel room doing interviews with different companies or universities. Quite a fun experience at the end of it, but at the time, obviously, you can imagine pretty stressful as well.
Yeah, for sure. What's the climate like in Brisbane?
Much better than Chicago, I can say. I mean, so Brisbane is north of Sydney and Melbourne. So it's the third biggest city in Australia, and it's sort of got a much warmer climate. So heading up into Queensland, it's got more of a tropical climate, very mild winters, sort of glorious summers. The tourism slogan is beautiful one day, perfect the next. So that gives you some sort of idea.
Wow, sounds good to me. Yeah, I've been to Melbourne and Sydney, but I didn't make it to Brisbane. But I would love to go sometime.
You can come visit me.
All right. I'll hold you to that.
Sure.
So you've also been, I know that the economics is your primary interest, or development economics, and we'll get into that in a bit, but this is a chess podcast. And actually, I have a long list of potential guests and you're on it, but what made me think of you right now is you made a rare appearance on Twitter. you popped in to defend Magnus, and it's kind of swirling in the chess culture right now. Everyone's talking about, he had his little argument with Maurice Ashley, and everyone seems to think it's some sort of existential crisis that the guy has like a 2750 performance rating instead of 2850 like usual. So what's your opinion on all this?
Yeah, well, I think people made a big deal out of something that wasn't really a big deal. So Maurice, I have a lot of respect for both of these guys for different reasons. And Maurice, he makes chess interesting, particularly for the masses. A lot of these interviews and commentary segments can be, completely dirt dry. And he's been one of the contributors, particularly in the US, to bringing chess to that level of media popularity. But one of the side effects of that is he does try to get a rise out of people a bit. He pokes and prods, and I think in this interview, it wasn't what was said in the interview, but apparently, according to Magnus and others, what was sort of said beforehand. Nothing too harsh, but really trying to make a big deal about the champs on a slide, and Grischuk could now be the favorite and so forth. And Magnus has probably been under a lot of pressure recently because of his exceptionally high standards that he holds himself to. So he reacted, he took the bait. I mean, at the end of the day, it was just such a nothing clip that the chess world decided to go crazy talking about.
Right.
But I think that the point that I wanted to make on Twitter was that we really shouldn't make a big deal about this slump that they call about Magnus, because he's just been at the top for so long. And that's what Wesley So, when someone tried to sort of bait him in an interview question, he said sort of the same thing. And Kramnik also defended Magnus when someone interviewed him and said, hey, Kramnik, you're almost number one. They both said the same thing, which is that Magnus has been there for so long at the top. That's really the measure that counts. And of course, there are going to be some swings along the way, but let's not get too excited about this.
Right. Yeah, and I know that you studied some behavioral economics, so the problem of recency bias definitely comes to mind.
Yeah, exactly.
And you see it in sports too. Like I get the sense you might be a football not American football, but proper football fan. And,
Sure.
And I followed a little bit, but I'm a bigger NBA fan. And I remember this year when Cleveland had a little slump in the middle of the season. They play 82 games when everyone knows who's going to play in the championship, and so they didn't play at peak performance throughout the season. And there was a period where everyone was in a panic that things are falling apart, basically. And that narrative happens in every sport every year, and it seems chess is no exception.
Yeah, you're exactly right. You see it in tennis as well, when some of the top guys have a bad game every now and then. But I mean, if you look at, I think, at Andy Murray at the moment in the tennis world, he's had a couple of what he'd call failures because he didn't make to whatever the final of the French Open or something. But he's still number one at the end of the day. And people seem to respect that he's now been there for a while, and it was the case before with Federer and Nadal and so forth. To me, I guess the most important thing is when I look at the games, it's the quality of the play. I really try to pay a lot of attention to that. And actually now in my economics, I'm actually doing a little bit of research in the chess realm, which is curious for me. And one of the things I'm really interested in is not just the results, but looking at how closely a person's play sort of matches engine perfection. And I have to say, Magnus, even in the Paris Grand Prix, for example, it was only blitz and rapid, but the quality of his play was all around pretty good. So I guess the proof will be in the pudding in the coming months. We'll see what happens.
Yeah. So could you tell us a little bit more about that study? It sounds interesting.
Yeah, well, I got some good advice recently as I've sort of been struggling to make my way in economics, because I really love economics and I love what I do, but at the end of the day I'm a sort of a 2000 rated academic, and it's a bit hard after you've come from the chess world for your ego to try and build up. But someone said to me that when you're a young researcher you should really try to start out working on areas that you know a lot about from your personal life, and in my case that's pretty much chess. So I started looking at that and found out that there's actually a lot of researchers around the world from different fields, computer programming and sociology and some other, even gender studies, have been looking at the chess world. So I've started looking at that a bit now, particularly in the case of behavioral economics. You can imagine that a lot of these human traits that, this sort of well-known book now, Thinking Fast and Slow, talks about, you can imagine they play a big role in chess. So now, I've got these the databases that we use every day in chess. I'm trying to sort of look at that from a more statistical point of view rather than from a chess point of view, and look at some of the ways or some of the factors that make people better or worse in their performances.
Okay. So are you familiar with this CAP system that chess.com released like about a year ago?
I am.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is that what you're using, or something else?
Well, there's different methodologies that pretty much all boil down to the same thing. So chess.com's was, it's particularly focused around cheating detection as one of its main aims. But the bare bones of it is the same sort of thing, comparing the quality of a person's play to what engines do. Ken Regan, with his work for the FIDE Commission on Cheating, has something similar. And now some different researchers, particularly some sort of high-level computer programmers, have been looking at it for different ways to measure who's the best player of all time and all that sort of stuff. But they all pretty much the same thing. It's just comparing good engine play to what humans are doing.
Okay. Yeah, it sounds interesting. We'll have to keep an eye on your blog and stuff. Are you gonna
Sure.
Are you gonna keep blogging now that your academic search has settled down?
Yeah, I got a bit. Well, I wouldn't say lazy. I got lazy on the blog for a while because I was so busy with everything else. But I really like writing. Actually, in school, that's what I was best at. It wasn't math or anything like that. So I think I'm going to keep that going, particularly because it helps to keep academics grounded as well. I think we can sort of get caught up in our world of talking in all this jargon. I think it's really important when we work on a project to remember or to keep in mind how it can be used in the real world rather than just impressing other academics. And somehow writing a blog for me sort of keeps me connected. So I think I'll keep it going.
Excellent. And for any listeners who haven't checked it out, I definitely recommend it. I haven't even gone through the whole archive yet. I mean, like I said, I've been following you since the Olympiad, but it appears you've been blogging for like 7 years or something?
Yeah, for a long time, but it's good you haven't gone through the archive yet, because I just moved servers and somehow I messed it up, so all the images are missing at the moment.
Oh, okay.
I've got to go back and fix it, but it should, in a week or so, it should be back to its normal self.
Okay, that's funny. So, David, why don't we get into your own chess background a little bit?
Sure.
Tell us about your youth in Brisbane.
Yeah, well, I guess you can imagine. I mean, Australia is so far away from everywhere. And back when I was a kid, the world wasn't as connected as it is now. So I guess Australia was sort of the backwaters of chess in a way. We had this one reasonably famous grandmaster, Ian Rogers, who's retired from chess but is still sort of active in promoting chess in Australia. But other than that, we weren't really featuring at all on the world stage. But I was very lucky because if you come from a country where chess is not that big, you've got better chances to, say, win your national age titles, which mean you can go to the world championships. So when I was 9, I got to go to the World Under-10 Championships, which was a big deal for me. That was in Hungary, where there was Peter Lecko playing and Svidler and so forth. And I had that was a big eye-opener for me. And so I kept going with chess in Australia, along with all the typical sports that us Australians are sort of forced to do, and really got a love for it. And so I had a couple of good results, but I didn't actually get the Grandmaster title until I was a fair bit older. I think I was 24 at the time. So I actually got the 3 norms when I was about 20, but then it took me quite a while to get over 2,500. But around about this time in my life, I'd sort of decided that chess wasn't going to be my profession. So while I've done sort of a few things in the chess world with commentary and writing books and so forth, I think I never really had any aspirations to do it full time.
So what made you come to that decision?
It's a good question. I think the main thing is that I really love chess, and I didn't want to lose that. You can imagine growing up with a lot of my peers and seeing them from the age of 9, basically, at these World Junior events. I've watched their path to becoming chess professionals, and it was, for a lot of them from different countries, it was already a given that this was the path they were going to go down, and it made sense. In some of these countries, there were sort of less attractive career opportunities if you went to university than perhaps in Australia. And it becomes hard work, when you lose a little bit of the love for the game. You can lose a little bit of the love for the game. And for me, I like playing crazy, dubious openings, and I like going to cafes and bars and hustling people coffee house style. And I like playing bug house and all these sort of things. You can see from my opening repertoire that I don't have a professional opening repertoire. But most importantly, I guess, is that I really love other things in life that have high priority to me. I think with chess, you really have to immerse yourself 100%, and shutting yourself off from the West of the world and politics and policy issues is almost a good thing for your profession. Whereas for me, I've always been really involved in social policy and things like that, and wanting to contribute in that area. That's really been a big driver for me. So it's like these 2 factors, a push and a pull factor. One, that I really wanted to contribute in different ways to society, and the other, I didn't want to lose the love for chess. And so the compromise that I've come up with kind of enables me to do both, I guess.
Yeah, that's understandable, and you do a good job. I mean, especially because I get the impression you're pretty stretched for time, but you do a good job contributing to the discourse in the chess world. When there's controversies like this silly one with Magnus, or more serious ones, it seems like you managed to make your voice heard, and you probably have more perspective, since you're studying different subjects than some other people who are just knee deep in chess might.
Yeah, in a way that's true. I mean, I've tried to sort of create some synergies between my chess skills and my research skills, and there's a surprising amount of overlap, actually, which is good. I tend to not want to get involved in, for example, chess politics too much if it's something that I don't know much about or can't contribute to. So if it's something to do with, say, I don't know, FIDE politics or something like this, it's something that I don't really know very much about, so I tend to keep my opinions to myself. But when a debate might crop up about are women as good at chess as men, or something like this, something where, as a researcher, I can actually add some meaningful statistics to the debate, then I don't mind writing something about it.
Right. And speaking of that topic, I know you had a blog post about that, and you linked to you linked to a study that basically tackled this question. So could you try to explain to our listeners in sort of layman's terms what the conclusion of that study was and sort of the thesis of the blog post you wrote?
Oh, you put me on the spot now about the study.
Well, you just defended your thesis, so this is child's play in comparison.
Yeah, well, the thing is that there's actually been quite a lot of research done on the topic of gender in chess, and actually subsequent to that blog post and that sort of debate that was sparked by Nigel Short, there's been some more research done about that. Actually, some economists recently, combined with some computer programmers, and sort of backed a little bit by Google, have very recently come out with some more research about women in chess. So there's a lot of stuff being done in this area that's, to me, it's very interesting because most of the economic world or the academic world doesn't focus on the chess research that much because things only come out once every now and then. And for some reason, the chess world also doesn't get wind of it. So these things kind of float in the ether a bit. But for me, when I come across these things, I'd like to make them known. So now's a good chance for me to tell you about this most recent study. But just quickly to what you said before, the general consensus in the academic world or the research world about gender in chess is that it was largely driven by participation. So the fact that girls might be discouraged from playing chess as they're growing up, and we've got less girls playing from a younger age, that pretty much explains most of the rating gap that we have. And we shouldn't really be talking about the extremes of the distribution because we know the extremes are unreliable. So we're not really talking about the number of women in the top 20 in the world or something like that. But across the board, there doesn't seem to be any biological sort of basis for things. So that was the general thesis. But then there's recent research, which I found fascinating, was they actually looked at what happens when women play against men versus when women play against other women. And they found something really interesting where they're looking at the quality of play, so within the game, so how closely you're matching the best moves of engines. And the general conclusion they came up with is that you take your average, say, 2,000 plus rated female, when she plays against a man, she seems to play slightly lower quality moves on average than if she plays against another woman. And their explanation for that is there's a big sort of research area that women have problems in competitive environment with other men. You find this in sort of math tests in school and sometimes in the workplace when trying to get promotions and so forth. So that was their explanation. And to me, I find that a far more interesting question than this sort of reasonably archaic issue about the biological strengths.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you for the explainer. So do you have opinions about, like, should women? So I guess that would suggest that that would be an argument for women continuing to have separate events. Do you have an opinion about, like, separate events and separate titles and all that stuff?
Yeah, I have. I mean, so I have opinions about these, but again, I may not be that well versed in giving them. But the competition argument does seem to suggest that. Well, and also the participation type argument seems to suggest that having women's titles is not such a bad thing, because the number one thing we want to do is we don't want women to get discouraged from playing chess when they're younger just because it's a competitive male environment. So that's some sort of justification for keeping women's titles, I guess. But the fact that women seem to play better against other women than against men, I don't think we really understand fully what the reasons are behind this. And if it is because women feel somehow intimidated by an overly macho environment in the chess world, then that's okay. That's something that we can try to address one way or the other. But yeah, I'm hesitant to give an opinion because I don't think we understand the reasons behind this finding yet, and I certainly don't know them well enough.
Okay. So why don't we? You've taken us through your childhood in chess. Could you give us a broader perspective? And you mentioned Ian Rogers, who I think a lot of listeners have heard of and is well known. But what else is happening with chess in Australia?
Yeah, so you're asking the Aussie who's been living in
right.
Europe for the past 5 years.
But you did play on the Olympiad team, so
yeah. Well, I can tell you one thing. When I played my first Olympiad, there were 6 of us in the team. and I was me and my one of my peers. We were the two youngest by far on the team. That was back in 2004 in Calvia in Spain. The last two Olympiads, I've been the oldest guy in the team. So that gives you sort of an idea about how things changed. In fact, if you take me out of the team, I think 3 years ago we had an average age of 21, and now it's gone up to 23 or something like this. So it's a bunch of young kids. We've got one of the most talented juniors in the world, Anton Smirnov, who's just become a Grandmaster. He's 15 years old.
Wow. And
a lot of other guys sort of around that 18 to 22 year sort of mark who are picking up GM norms left, right, and centre. So there's a lot of action happening in Australia in the junior ranks. And to be honest, I think there's two factors for it. One is that the world is just so much better connected now. We've got access to a lot of online resources. You can get high-quality Skype coaching even if you're in Australia. So that's a big deal. And the second, I don't want to embarrass him too much, but Ian Rogers, when he retired from chess, and he kept the same passion for the game and the same energy, and he put most of it into coaching and promoting chess in Australia. And together with his wife, Kathy Rogers, who's also quite involved, I think that the two of them have been a pretty big driving force in promoting chess. So when I get back to Australia, my life's going to be a lot more difficult playing these weekenders than it was when I left. That's for sure.
Right. Well, that's probably a good thing in your mind, I would think.
Yeah.
So what does Ian Rogers like? What does he do? Does he have a foundation or have a chess school, or like how is the program that's helping all these kids structured? If you know.
Well, I sort of vaguely know, but
okay.
I'm not too. I might get some of the acronyms wrong and so forth, but we have this sort of Australian junior squad now that our talented juniors sort of get put into, and they have these regular meetups in cities around Australia. And Ian Rogers is heavily involved with organising and also coaching at these squads, and he's been very instrumental in getting the other top players and the older players there as coaches as well. Raising funds as well. He's also involved in the selection for all sorts of events. So before we used to send one player in each age group from each gender to the World Youth Championships, but now there's also the World Youth Olympiads and Asian Junior Championships, which normally weren't such a priority for Australia, but he's sort of been driving that as well. And he's also always at the Olympiads with his wife. Sometimes, I think the last two Olympiads, he was the captain of the Australian women's team, actually. So he's been he's wearing a lot of hats in the chess world, as well as being a full-time chess journalist and writing up different articles. So and coaching chess as well. I think he basically does it all. Okay.
And do you? I know that you're very busy. So do you do any chess teaching?
No, I get a lot of requests for coaching, but it's something that I've pretty much had to shelve because of my time constraints. One thing that I do every now and then is a bit of online chess commentary, which I really love. And the second is a bit of online banter blitz. You know, there's a few servers now that do these video banter blitz. And as I mentioned before, the sort of chess that I like is basically going to cafes and coffee houses and sledging, having this banter with people. And I get to do that and get paid for it. So that's something that I keep my hand in.
Nice. Yeah, I had a question about your chess style, because I haven't made like a big study of your games. But you mentioned on your blog that you're an attacking player. But in your Olympiad recap, you also say that you were sort of selected as the first board mainly for your ability to hold down the fort against the 2700s and maybe hold a draw. So I had some trouble reconciling those two styles.
Yeah, it's not so much that they're two styles; they're two attributes of a player, I think. So if you get paired against a really strong player and you want to make a draw, playing sort of solid, holding down the fort, and trying to swap off pieces, that's typically a bad way to go about things. As long as the game is under control for the other guy, the stronger player, it's pretty likely that he's going to squeeze you. It's sort of basic psychology. So I try to unbalance my opponents as much as possible, whether I'm playing a weaker player or a stronger player. So my game against Magnus, I sacrificed one pawn, offered a second one, ended up sacrificing in exchange. When I drew with Aronian, it was the same thing. I played a very dodgy opening in the beginning, and I sacrificed the exchange on move 12 or something like this. This has sort of been my attitude against the stronger players. Did the same against Ivanchuk, and the games all end up in draws, but it's not because I'm playing super solid. It's because for me, this is when I'm playing at my best. And when you play against one of these guys who are professionals and who've studied chess all day long and they've got their seconds working for them full time, the best thing to do to maximize your chances is to try and get you both as unsettled as possible, as quickly as possible.
Oh wow, that's a really good insight. So when you're playing these games, do you have like a voice in your head that's telling you like play safe, or are you just able to just is it natural to you to just let it fly?
It used to be the case for sure that I think we all have this voice because humans by our nature are risk-averse creatures. I mean, it's behavioral economics 101 basically, and these are some of the things that poker players have to learn to shelve, to get rid of. I think you were a poker player for many years, right? So
right, yeah.
You also know about this, that we've got these natural impulses that if we want to be successful, we've got to get rid of them.
Right.
Investment bankers and traders have the same sort of thing. So for me, it actually came about. Well, I always loved to take risks when I was younger, but then but the risk aversion kicked in as I got a bit older. But it was once I took up this particular opening, the Portuguese gambit for black against e4, and once that became my standard, there's absolutely no way to play this in a safe way if you don't throw all your cards in, or whatever you say, all your chips in. Sorry, I'm not a poker player. I'm trying to use the terms.
Right. Poker players misuse them too. So
that makes me feel a bit better. But if you don't burn your bridges, let's just say that. If you don't burn your bridges and just go for it, the opening just doesn't work. So that was a real crash course in trying to get rid of these behavioral biases that I had before.
Nice. And I would imagine it's good advice for anyone playing someone higher rated. So even, you're at 2,500 playing at 2,750 or whatever. But would you say it applies across all levels? Like if I'm playing a 2,500, I should still try to make them uncomfortable.
Yeah, absolutely. I know you had Simon Williams on the show. He's kind of a good example for this because if you look at people around Simon's rating, there's very few who've got these 2,700 scalps, and myself included, because Simon's kind of an extreme example. So I've never beaten a 2,700 player, but he's got a couple of huge scalps because he'll just go for it. That's his style no matter what. He's all in from the get-go, white, black, whatever your rating is. And it means that he loses to a couple of 2,100s every now and then, but he's also going to have these poster games that he can add to his resume.
Yeah, exactly. I think I may have told the story when Simon was a guest, but the way I originally met him was in the Reykjavik Open, and he knew he was playing Ivan Sokolov the night before, and he had black, and he was just basically like out drinking, cursing up a storm, talking about how he's going to play the Dutch. He doesn't care how unsound people say it is, and of course the next day he got that scalp, and that video is now memorialized on chess.com. That game is so.
Yeah.
It's funny. I can definitely vouch for that.
Yeah, but just to quickly go back to your question about when club players play against someone stronger, does the same advice apply? It's absolutely true, and I think at sort of weaker levels as well, the natural impulse to try and play conservatively and solidly and correct chess against your stronger opponents, especially to play for a draw from the start. That's the biggest mistake that you can make, because I've seen so many games, also when I've been on the stronger side, my opponents just trying to trade off all the pieces as quickly as possible, as solidly as possible, complication averse, stay away from tactics, and every trade increases my advantage by just a little bit, maybe 0.1, 0.2 of a pawn. And by the time we get to an endgame, they might think, phew, I've made it to an endgame against the Grandmaster, but it's just a lost endgame,
right.
Because they've just been drifting like the frog in the water. So my biggest advice, particularly if you want to improve and you're a young player or you're young at heart and you want to get better, is just don't be scared of who you're playing. Play your natural game, and if you're an attacking player, play an attacking game. Who cares? When I played the game against Aronian and I saw the exchange sacrifice that was too difficult to complicate and quite unsound, I spent I guess, close to half an hour on this move. And when I got into time trial later, I really regretted it because I knew that I was going to play the move after about 2 minutes. But
That's very funny.
I just couldn't bring myself to do it,
That's funny. When I had Sam Shanklin on, he gave that exact advice. He said, don't spend 25 minutes on a move because you know what you're going to play.
Yeah. Yeah.
So a lot of listeners, obviously, to this podcast will never have the experience of playing guys like that, myself included. So I'm just curious, were your nerves especially acute for games like that?
Yeah, for sure. Also because they were all basically in team events. That's the only chance that a guy like me is going to get to play against these guys because they don't play big opens most of the time. But if Australia's paired with Norway or Australia's paired with Armenia, then suddenly I get this rare opportunity. But then it also means that my result does affect the team as well. So there's that, and also the fact that, particularly the game against Magnus, I've never had the experience of playing with literally 20 cameras on you for the entire game. So, I don't think there's any advice that I can give on how to get over the nerves because I'm a huge victim myself. Well,
obviously, if you drew him and you took your shots, so I think you found a way to battle them a little bit. So I commend you for that. So do you think you'll be able to keep playing Olympiads with your new upcoming job?
Well, it's a good question. I think my rating is good enough that I should be in the team without any problems, but there's also, I feel a little bit of guilt if I take a spot because the young guys in Australia, a lot of them have aspirations to become professional as their full-time career, and they're really hungry as well. And even if their strength may not be quite up to mine just yet, there's no question in my mind that they're on this upward trajectory. So I almost feel some obligation to step aside. So I'm not entirely sure what I'm going to do come the next Olympiad. But there is also some potential in the future that I might move into more of a support role as well, because I do have a fair bit of pride in our national team, and our team's been doing better and better each year at the Olympiad. I mean, we're still, far down on the lower boards compared to the US, but I would like to see us, get a top 10 finish at some point, and so I'd like to be involved in some way.
Nice, yeah, and I've noticed in your book reviews, you do go pretty deep in the weeds on the openings, so...
Yeah, it's probably, I guess with my sort of research sort of skills now, openings, they're one area where I can really contribute, I think, and it's also an area where it doesn't matter if my overall chess skills start to deteriorate, I can still make a bit of a difference, I guess.
Right. Cool. Well, David, let's get into your academic research. So you switched from behavioral economics to sort of development economics a few years ago. What drove your interest in that subject?
So I wouldn't call it a complete switch. I kind of do both, particularly applying the development sort of stuff, the behavioral stuff, to the development context. I guess, it's going back to my inner motivations, if I can use a cliche, but I've always wanted to be involved in creating better policies. I used to work for the Australian government where we were involved in policy, and particularly, I guess you could call me somewhat socially minded, but particularly in developing countries, you can imagine that the behavioral biases that people have, they play a much bigger role, because things like social norms and social networks and relying on each other and trusting each other, they play a much bigger role in these countries where they don't have these formal institutions, where they don't have a really rigid government and a structured banking system or whatever else. So actually behavioral economics, I think it can do more good comparatively in these countries, and a lot of these issues I've been interested in for a while, so it was kind of a bit of a natural progression for me, I guess you could say. Okay.
And what was there a moment that sparked your interest in immigration? How did that become such a topic of interest for you?
Yeah, I don't think there was a particular moment necessarily. I've have some friends who are refugees, also from not this current wave of refugees, but sort of going back, so people my age who are refugees. So there's some personal connection to some extent. Actually, I made some new friends at the last Olympiad from the team from Libya, for example, as well, and just chatting with them, in between the rounds about what they go through. I mean, we're there at the Olympiad, we're all in the same queue to get our coffees and complaining about the food and stuff, and then they tell me about what's happening back home and ask about their family, and they say, yeah, my brother's been in jail for 4 years without trial or something like this. So you hear these things that they just don't make any sense in the context of these chess players huddled together in this international community. So I don't know. I mean, I guess we all know people like this and know stories like this to some extent, and for some reason they maybe affected me a bit more, but also because I kind of already had the tools at my disposal to do something, I guess, proactive. So I thought that I'd probably better make use of it.
Nice. And do you think there'll be, so you've done like studies with indigenous people in Australia, and you lived in Peru for a bit?
Yeah, for a little bit. Well, teaching sort of a grassroots charity there. Yeah.
Wow. And do you think that there'll be a lot of travel once you settle down into your professor track, or will you be staying put more often?
I think there'll still be a fair bit, actually, because most of my current wave of research is based in developing countries. So at the moment, I'm working on a project in Somalia.
Wow.
That's probably not an area that I'm going to travel to anytime soon,
Right.
as you can imagine. But I do have a lot of interest in. I think once I move back to Australia, my focus will be a little bit more on developing countries around Australia, so in the Pacific sort of region and Southeast Asia. These topics really sort of interest me a lot. But on the other hand, I have my other arms of research as well, like as I was mentioning, this sort of chess analysis. So that's completely different to development economics. So I've got a couple of different interests, I guess. And one of the nice things about being a researcher is that you can pick and choose what you want to work on a given day. So if on one day I've been working really hard, particularly, so at the moment I'm working on women's issues in Somalia, and the days can get quite depressing after a long day of research. So the next day I might say, today I'm just working on my chess stuff, and that's it. And it's pretty good for the sanity.
Yeah, that makes sense. And are you going to be teaching classes in Brisbane too?
Yeah, it's not decided yet what I'll teach, but I think it'll be pretty likely that it'll be either behavioral economics or development economics. Okay,
nice. And when is the move?
November I start my position there, so I'll move a little bit before then. My mum and dad are pretty happy to have me back because I think I left when I was 17, so it's been quite a while, 15 years. So there'll be some readjusting, I guess.
Yeah, for sure. And do you have brothers and sisters?
I have one sister. Actually, my family are all artistic in one way or another. My sister is a professional artist, and my mum also, and my father is an architect, so they can all draw, and my sister is a fantastic painter, but I have zero artistic abilities, really nothing at all. I'm the economist chess player, so I don't know how that happens.
Yeah, that's funny. I'm with you. Cool. And I know, David, you also blog about music. Are you still finding the time to check out new music, or too busy?
That's funny. Yeah, I don't actually know how it happened that I got so into music, because I'm not very musical myself, I have to say. But I really like the independent music scene. One of the great things about living in Amsterdam is that you had some great bands coming through, and even these little places where local bands and traveling bands, they always seem to end up in Amsterdam. So that was really cool. I'm still, it's just my sort of hobby on the side, but I'm still very much into music. Yeah.
Nice. And how's life in Milan?
Different. Definitely different to Amsterdam for sure. The Italian culture is something that I really didn't know too much about besides the stereotypes, and they're living up to some of them, and to others I was completely wrong. So that's it's been kind of eye-opening. I guess life here is kind of hidden a little bit because my work is pretty intense, and I've learned far more, I guess, about Somalia than I have about Italy since being here. But it's been really cool. The university here is really great, and the people are very impressive. My Italian has not improved too much, but the food is amazing, and the country's got such rich history. So it's been kind of one last international adventure, I guess, before I sort of put down roots in Australia.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's nice that you're coming home. So is there anywhere I missed in terms of where you've lived? We've got Peru, Amsterdam, Milan now. Anywhere else in your travel? Well, I guess Canberra, right?
Yeah, well, when I was 17, I moved to Melbourne, so that's where I did my undergraduate.
Okay.
It might not seem like a big move for non-Australians, but actually it's, a 2-hour flight between the two cities, so it's kind of a far distance.
It's a big continent.
Yeah. Actually, I'll tell you something a little bit funny about Peru, if you got the time. So
sure.
I went there as kind of there was a small grassroots organization. I think it was based out of Chicago, actually, in sort of the hills about 2 hours away from Lima, and it was a school in a very poor area. They sort of set up some classes for the kids, and they wanted a chess teacher. When I sort of wrote to them on email and we spoke about it, they said, yeah, you'll have these classes with the kids there, and you'll have a teacher with you at all times who can speak Spanish, so it won't matter that you can't speak Spanish, and everything will be fine. And they kind of oversold it to me a bit because... So I read a Spanish phrase book on the flight there, which was my entire knowledge of Spanish. When I got there, I found out that not only was I teaching all the chess classes by myself, but I also had to teach the math classes. I was the full-time physical education teacher and a stand-in dance teacher as well.
Unbelievable.
Yeah. So, I mean, the dance classes were actually not that bad because they didn't involve that much talking, so I didn't have to try and pretend I could speak Spanish. But of course, I can't dance, so that was that issue.
Yeah, nor can I. That's hilarious. But how did it work out? Did you manage to teach anything?
Yeah, well, I hope so. I certainly tried to learn Spanish in quick time, and I can say that I can probably speak Spanish if it's only about math and chess, then I can do okay. So but it was a super great experience. I have to say that this organization was really great. The people and the kids in this area was super friendly and super nice. And the best part, I guess, for me is that now, it's been 5 years since I was there, or now even 6 years, but the chess is still going.
Wow.
I came with a backpack where I had 3 changes of clothes, and the rest of the backpack was full of chess sets that one of the Australian coaching companies had donated kindly. So we brought those over, and I brought over a bunch of curricula as well. And so now they're new recruits whenever they get new volunteers. Even if they don't know that much about chess besides the moves, they've got a very nice and easily laid out curricula they can use. They've got new chess sets. They've got some clocks. And I see all these pictures. They send me pictures and videos. We even ran a tournament there. So what's nice for me is that, I'm sort of long gone now, but it's kicked on. It's kept going. It hasn't died out. And that makes me happy.
Yeah, that must be a good feeling. That's pretty cool. Yeah, definitely one of the great things about chess. Not a lot of startup costs.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So David, I just have a couple more questions. I want to just circle back to chess a little bit. So,
sure.
So you wrote a review of Danny Gormley's sort of his chess memoir, and in it you had an interesting quote. I thought that our listeners might be interested in hearing you talk a little more about. So you said, life as a sub 2600 Grandmaster is a paradox. On the one hand, we're revered, admired, often envied within the chess world. On the other, it's hard to justify such veneration for journeymen who don't even figure in the top 250 for their narrow profession. And it's reflected in how hard it is to make a living from chess. So, I guess I'd just like to hear you expand on that a little bit. I mean, I don't think it's a shock, but it's sort of frank and modest terms. So anyway, could you talk about that a little more?
Yeah, it's. I think this is one of the reasons why I liked Danny's book so much because he's a very honest and forthright guy. You know, he can rub people the wrong way, but he says exactly what he thinks. And I think that there are some chess fans who aren't that closely connected to the world of Grandmasters who might think that it's sort of a glamorous profession. And it is at the top to some extent. And we are, even myself at my lowly rating, you know, sometimes I'm treated like a mini celebrity here and there. But the truth of the matter is that it's really scraping a living for most people around this, 2,500, even today 2,600, early 2,600 sort of range. And I think it was really nice that Danny sort of brought that to light a bit, that life can be a bit tough. And for me, the paradox I was describing there is the fact that, compared to someone who's, say, ranked 600 in the world at tennis or 500 in the world at tennis, most people don't know their names, and the fans are unlikely to be writing them emails or asking for their autograph. But in chess, for some reason, that might still happen because of this Grandmaster title, this particular 2 letters that you put in front of your name. And to me, it was just an interesting paradox that was finally brought to light.
Right. Well, that's part of it. But I think that also, like, if you look at it on a country by country basis, so okay, you know, you're 300th in the world or whatever it is, but to be second in the country, like huge continent, you know, that means that everyone in Australia who plays chess is going to know who you are and going to look up to you. And I mean, I think that's a good thing personally. I mean, I get that it's hard to make.
No, you're right. I mean, that's so I guess I'm a little bit of a unusual case in that extent, because if you look at the world rating list and you look at the 5 people above me and the 5 people below me, most of them come from countries where they've got dozens of grandmasters. In Russia, 100 grandmasters. So I kind of stick out a little bit, which might artificially inflate my status a little bit as well, to be honest. You know, I mean, a lot of these sort of 2,500 Russians won't get the chance to play against Magnus. They'll never get the chance to play in an Olympiad or something, whereas I do get that chance. So there's that. But on the other hand, it's a philosophical question about what would have happened to me if I had been born in Russia instead of Australia. I mean, these are all things I guess, we'll never know the answer to.
Yes, okay. All right, well, I mean, that's interesting. And I guess the one other thing to say about it is, I mean, I think things are getting better for chess players who are willing to teach, you know. And
that's true.
And especially like with the internet, obviously, with YouTube and stuff like that, people who are willing to share their ideas, I think that professional opportunities are a little better. But I get that you know, not everyone who loves to play loves to teach. So,
but you make a good point though, because I think the term chess professional has sort of been abused a little bit, and now I would like to see chess professional, more recognition given to all the different ways that people can be chess professionals. Because, as you say, there's a lot more knowledge sharing than there used to be before. So many great websites and forums where people contribute, and so many great Twitch streams or YouTube videos or whatever else.
Podcasts.
Let's not forget the podcast. No, as I was saying at the outset, I mean, this podcast, this thing that you've got going, it's an idea that I, and I'm sure many other people, sort of vaguely mulled about it at one point in time, but we never got around to doing it. And you've done it, and I think it's a fantastic resource for the chess world as well. So it's just another example. I mean, to be a chess fan at the moment is no better time. If you look at throughout history to be a chess fan, people trying to wait in Australia to get a newspaper from a game in the Fischer-Spassky match that happened weeks ago, you know, that doesn't happen anymore. You've got real-time live coverage. So it's a real great time to be a fan of chess.
Nice. Yeah, that's a good point. It's a great time to be a fan of chess and a great time to be trying to improve. Yes. So last question, David. I know that you're not like nose to the grindstone in your chess game right now, but our listeners always want to know how to get better. So do you have any like either big picture or small picture advice of how people should approach improving at chess?
Yes.
I mean, you already gave good insight in how to play higher rated players. So,
well, I can tell you. I mean, so as you've probably worked out by now, I don't have much time to spend on chess, which means that I try to spend it on what in economics would call the areas where you get the most marginal benefit. So the ones where you get your most bang for your buck.
That's what I need.
Yes. And so I've got a few other tips that have worked for me personally. Like the opening repertoire that I have now is not randomly chosen, but it's chosen to minimize the work I have to put in to maximize the results. But I wouldn't say that that's like the biggest tip. That's taken a long time. The biggest tip would be that the biggest bang for your buck you can get by far is endgames, particularly in the way that we've changed the time controls a lot now, so that often you don't have the second, or very rarely do you ever have a third time control now. You really need to know from a much earlier stage in the game what sort of endgames might arise from your middle game structure and whether they could be good or bad. And being able to make these early judgments based on these early heuristics, that can only come from studying endgames. But my second piece of advice, which sort of relates a bit to the first, is that if you don't have much time, and then chess is always going to seem like work when you have to study, you got to do the things that you love. You got to keep the enjoyment. So when people ask me how they can get better at endgames, I always recommend, there's this book by Van Perlo, this Dutch, he was a Dutch chess enthusiast, shall we call him, because basically for decades he collected clippings from interesting chess endgames that he analyzed himself and eventually put them into a collection. And you learn so much from this massive book, but it's all fun endgames that he found that he thinks are interesting. So you never get bored reading this book, but you can improve your endgame knowledge at the same time. And so there's a bunch of other different types of specific examples that I can quote, but the general principle is basically you want to work on things that you know are going to give you the biggest benefit, but you want to do it in a way that you're not going to get demotivated quickly.
Wow.
And that's sort of my own philosophy that seems to work for me so far.
That's great advice. Do you remember the title of that book by the Dutch author?
Oh, it's Van Perlo's Endgame, and then I can't remember the last word. I think it's could be manual or Endgame Tactics. I can't remember exactly.
Okay, well, in the Google age, I'm sure you get full credit.
But Van Perlo, V-A-N, and then his last name, P-E-R-L-O, and it shouldn't be too hard to whip it up.
Excellent. Okay, well, David, I don't have any more questions. If anyone wants to reach out to you, is there a way that they can do that?
Actually, I just realized that on my website, which, as I told you, is kind of in a messy place at the moment, doesn't even have a contact form. But my professional website, as in my economist website, does have a contact form. So you can get to there from davidsmerdon.com, which is my chess website. There's a link to economics, and then you can find the contact form. But I'm always on Twitter, as you observed before, so you can always get me through there as well.
Cool. Well, I'll link to both of them, and I just want to say I reached out to David for his economics through his economics website, and since you had a job, I didn't feel too bad doing it. If you hadn't been hired yet, if you hadn't been hired yet, I would have felt bad. Like, no, I don't have a job for you, but I have some free work that I'd like you to do.
Look, this has not been work at all for me, Ben. Like I said, and I don't want to harp on too much about it, but I think this podcast is super cool, and I really wish you good luck with it. I hope you can continue it, and I hope it becomes quite popular in the chess world, because I think it deserves to be.
Cool. Thanks, David. Well, I'm having fun doing it. So, okay. Well, good luck with everything, and we'll keep an eye on your blog and Twitter.
Thanks. Cheers. Thanks a lot.
Thanks for listening to Perpetual Chess. To hear more episodes, give feedback, or suggest guests, go to perpetualchesspod.com. If you like the show, please help me out by telling your friends and giving me a high rating on iTunes. I'll be back next week with another episode of the Perpetual Chess Podcast.